The night air was heavy, with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and distant smoke from chimneys. Daniel Miller pulled his tattered coat tighter around him, his loyal dog Rusty trotting at his side. They hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the last crust of bread had been split evenly between them. Daniel's stomach groaned, but he kept walking, scanning alleys and dumpsters for something that could fill their bellies. Rusty barked once softly, nose twitching in the damp night air. "I know, boy," Daniel whispered. "We'll find something," he always promised, even when he wasn't sure. Tonight felt colder than usual. As they crossed under a flickering streetlight, Rusty suddenly stopped, ears up, body tense. His growl was low, not of threat, but of alert. Daniel followed his gaze and spotted something ahead. A car sat skewed at the edge of the road, one door hanging open, headlights still faintly glowing. The windshield was cracked, smoke curling from beneath the hood. Daniel's pulse quickened. Few things startled him anymore, but this scene was wrong. "Easy, boy," he murmured, gripping Rusty's collar. They approached cautiously, Daniel's eyes adjusting to the shadows. That's when he saw her slumped in the driver's seat, barely moving. It was a woman, her uniform dark and torn, badge still pinned but smeared with blood. A police officer. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale rasping like it could be her last. Daniel froze for a moment, torn between instinct to run. Cops rarely meant safety for men like him, and something deeper, something human. Rusty wed, pawing at the ground, urging him closer. "All right," Daniel muttered, steeling himself. "We can't just walk away." He leaned into the car. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered, lips trembling with a faint whisper. "Help!" It was barely a word, but enough. Daniel's mind raced. He had no phone, no money to call an ambulance, no one to lean on, just his hands, his dog, and what he could piece together. He looked at the wound near her shoulder, bleeding heavily. She wouldn't last long like this. He shrugged off his coat, tearing the fabric into strips. Rusty barked anxiously, circling the car. "I know, buddy." "I know," Daniel said, tying a makeshift bandage as tight as he dared. The woman winced, but didn't pull away. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice steady, despite the pounding in his chest. "Don't give up." The smoke from the hood thickened, acrid and stinging his eyes. He had to get her out. "Okay, Rusty, back up," Daniel said, bracing himself. With a grunt, he hooked his arms under hers, pulling her slowly from the seat. She was heavier than she looked, her boots dragging against the pavement. Daniel's muscles burned, but he refused to stop. Rusty barked encouragement, darting around them. Step by step, he dragged her away from the car, collapsing beside her. Once they reached the grass, her breathing was shallow, but steadier now, blood seeping into his torn coat. He whispered, "You're safe." Daniel checked her pulse, the way he remembered from first aid pamphlets he'd once read at a shelter. It was weak but present. "All right," he muttered. "One thing at a time." He pressed his coat harder against the wound, praying it would slow the bleeding. Rusty sat close, licking the officer's hand gently, as though reminding her she wasn't alone. For a moment, Daniel just sat there, rain beginning to drizzle, soaking them all. The street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians. It was just him, his dog, and this dying woman. And somehow it felt like the weight of the world. Her lips parted again, barely audible. Radio. Daniel glanced back at the wreck. The car's radio crackled faintly, the mic dangling. He ran back, grabbed it, and pressed the button. "This is—" He hesitated. He had no badge, no authority. But his voice hardened. "There's an officer down near 12th and Main. She needs help now." The static hissed. Then a voice answered sharp with urgency. "Identify yourself." Daniel swallowed. "Just someone who found her." "Send help, please." He dropped the mic and rushed back, kneeling beside her. Rusty whacked his tail once, as though sensing hope creeping into the night. Minutes felt like hours. The drizzle became a steady rain, washing the street in silver streams. Daniel sat hunched over the officer, shielding her with his own body. He whispered quietly, as if words could anchor her spirit, "Don't give up. You've got people waiting for you. You've got reasons to keep breathing." Rusty pressed against Daniel's side, warm and solid despite the storm. In the distance, faint sirens rose, cutting through the rain's rhythm. Relief rushed through Daniel, but fear lingered when the cops arrived. What would they see? A homeless man covered in blood, leaning over one of their own. The sirens grew louder, red and blue lights flashing through the night. Cars screeched to a halt, doors flying open, officers poured out, guns strong instinctively. "Hands up!" one shouted, the beam of a flashlight blinding Daniel. He froze slowly, raising his hands, bloodied rags still clutched.
"Wait!" he shouted back.
"She's alive. She needs help," Rusty barked, tail low but protective. Tension crackled, but another officer knelt quickly beside the injured woman, checking her pulse. "She's still breathing," he yelled. The guns lowered slightly. Paramedics rushed in, lifting her onto a stretcher. Daniel sagged with relief, rain streaking his face like tears. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, one cop grabbed Daniel's arm roughly. "What did you do?" he barked. Daniel didn't resist. His voice was calm. "I found her. I pulled her out. I stopped the bleeding." The officer sneered, disbelief clear, but another voice cut through. "He's telling the truth. Look." The officer pointed to the blood-soaked strips of fabric tied around her wound. The coat pressed firmly. "He saved her." Silence fell heavy, broken only by the paramedics' hurried commands. Rusty growled softly, but Daniel stroked his head, whispering, "It's all right, boy. We did what we had to do." The ambulance doors slammed shut, lights flashing as it sped away. The street was left with rain, steam rising from the wreck, and weary officers circling Daniel. One stepped forward, eyes softer than the rest. "What's your name?" Daniel hesitated. Names often meant records, judgments, doors closed. But tonight he had nothing to hide. "Daniel Miller," he said finally. He glanced down at Rusty, and this is Rusty. The dog wagged his tail, oblivious to the tension. The officer nodded slowly. "All right, Daniel. We'll need your statement." For once, Daniel wasn't running. For once, the truth was enough. They guided him to a squad car, but not in cuffs. Rusty trotted close, shaking rain from his coat. Inside the car, Daniel stared out the window, watching the flashing lights fade. His body ached, his stomach still empty. But something else filled him. Something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He had saved someone's life tonight. Not for reward, not for recognition, but because it was right. Rusty rested his head on Daniel's knee, eyes calm and trusting. Daniel scratched his ears, gently whispering, "Good job, partner." For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope. At the station, they offered him a towel and coffee. Daniel sat in silence. Rusty curled at his feet, dripping onto the tile floor. Officers moved around him, some casting suspicious glances, others curious ones. Eventually, a sergeant approached, his expression unreadable. "Tell me what happened," he said. Daniel recounted everything. The smoke, the wound, the bandages, the radio call. His voice was steady, his details precise. The sergeant listened, nodding occasionally, but said little. When Daniel finished, silence stretched. Then the sergeant said quietly, "You may have saved her life tonight." The words settled over Daniel like a weight lifted. He sipped the coffee slowly, its warmth chasing the chill from his bones. Rusty lifted his head, eyes gleaming in the fluorescent light, tail tapping softly. For years, Daniel had been invisible, just another man on the street, forgotten and ignored. But tonight, people had seen him not as a nuisance, not as a beggar, but as someone who mattered. He stroked Rusty's head, whispering, "We did all right, boy." The dog yawned, curling back into sleep. Daniel leaned against the cold wall, closing his eyes. The night wasn't over, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. Meanwhile, across the city, doctors worked furiously to stabilize the injured officer. Machines beeped, nurses moved swiftly, and blood transfusions dripped steadily. She fought to cling to life, her mind flickering in and out of darkness. Images of a stranger's voice echoed, "Stay with me, don't give up." Even as she drifted, something about those words anchored her. She wasn't ready to let go, not yet. Back at the station, Daniel sat quietly, unaware that the woman he'd saved would soon change his life as much as he had changed hers. Fate had already begun to weave their stories together. The rain finally eased outside, leaving the city washed clean, reflections shimmering on every surface. Daniel looked out the window of the station lobby, watching droplets slide down the glass. He felt Rusty shift against his leg, warm and steady. "Maybe tomorrow's different," he murmured. It wasn't a promise, just a fragile hope. Yet hope was something he hadn't allowed himself in years. The night had taken everything familiar and given him something new, a chance. He didn't know what would come next. But as long as Rusty was by his side, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Morning found Daniel where the night had left him. On a hard bench in the precinct lobby, towel around his shoulders, paper cup warming his palms, Rusty asleep in a borrowed canine blanket. A desk sergeant stopped with news that landed like sunlight. "She made it through," he said. No flourish, just relief. Critical, but alive. Daniel exhaled as if he'd been holding the entire night in his chest. He touched Rusty's ear. "Hear that, partner? She's still fighting." For years, he'd measured time by hunger and weather. Today, he measured it by a stranger's breath he'd guarded in the rain. A detective took his statement again, slower now, letting each detail find its place. Daniel described the cracked windshield, the hiss of hot wiring, the way her boots dragged on asphalt when he pulled. No heroics, no embroidery, just what happened. When the pen finally stopped, someone slid a donut across the table. Daniel broke it carefully, giving Rusty the larger half, then smiled at his own old rule. The dog eats first. The fluorescent lights felt less cruel with sugar in his mouth and purpose in his bones. For once, a police station wasn't an exit but a pause. Across town, fluorescent quiet cocooned Lieutenant Maya Bennett as machines kept time she couldn't keep herself. She surfaced through grey water to memory fragments. Rain on her face, a voice at her ear saying, "Stay with me," the soft press of a dog's head against her hand. When she rasped, "The man," the nurse's eyes brightened. "He came with you. He called it in. He's okay." The words steadied her like a railing. She wasn't done with the world. Somewhere a stranger and his dog had chosen not to look away. She borrowed their stubbornness and held on. By afternoon, Maya wanted the whole story, not the polite version. The detective explained, "A homeless man named Daniel Miller dragged her from a smoking cruiser, stripped his coat for a tourniquet, keyed a half-dead radio, then shielded her with his own body from rain and fear." "Where is he?" she asked. "Here in the building," came the answer. "We're figuring out next steps." Ma's voice, thin but certain, cut through sedation. "Next step is gratitude. Bring him if he's willing." Downstairs, Daniel watched rain snake down glass. When the invitation came, he stood too quickly, a reflex born of alarms. He hesitated at her doorway, suddenly aware of his edges, of how big grief and hunger make a man feel in small rooms. Maya lifted a hand. Gauze tape, determination. "You stayed," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Seemed like the job." Rusty stepped forward with the careful dignity of dogs in solemn places and set his chin on the bedrail. A smile tugged at Maya's mouth, then winced away. "Then I owe you both." Daniel shook his head. "No cameras, no speeches." "Please," she met his eyes. "No press," she promised. "Just truth." In that quiet bargain, something like trust began. News still tried to sniff its way in. A scanner hobbyist tweeted about a civilian collar on an officer downed. The department issued a single line. A bystander rendered life-saving aid. No names, no face. Daniel kept to the edges, shelter bed at night, day shifts, lugging carts and coaxing stubborn hinges back into courtesy for facilities. He didn't chase praise. He chased screws that needed tightening and doors that stopped pinching nurses' fingers. Rusty learned the building's kindnesses by heart, a bowl by laundry, a nap spot by receiving. People started saying thanks with their eyes before their mouths remembered how. On the third day, Maya could sit up without bargaining. "Tell me about you," she said. Daniel measured the ceiling tiles. Her job went, then the lease, then the phone. I walked. He found me under a bridge and declared ownership. Rusty thumped the floor, pleased with the origin story. "What do you want now?" Maya asked. Daniel looked at his dog, a door that opens without a fight. "Work that isn't a lie. His bowl full before mine?" She nodded. Not pity, not plan, just understanding. And later dialed numbers that moved small stones. ID replacement, a dog-friendly shelter, a short contract. None of it came with cameras. It came with forms, foil blankets, signatures, and a caseworker with a sea-green scarf who said, "Welcome, a chair being pulled out for you." The shelter wrote Rusty on a tag, even though the microchip reader blinked empty. Facilities handed Daniel a tool cart and a map of squeaks. That first night, Rusty snored like a forgiving engine, while rain brushed the windows instead of his coat. Daniel lay awake, hand on warm fur, whispering, "We'll earn this." The room didn't answer, but morning did in light through blinds instead of through alley grates. Work remembered him. He leveled a laundry machine that had bullied nurses for months, rehung a door that nicked knuckles, made a sulking dryer turn useful again. He didn't announce fixes. He made problems disappear. Word traveled faster than memos. Rusty made rounds, bestowing morale like a benediction. On her first sanctioned walk outside the ward, Maya met them at a small city park. The planners forgot to ruin. They moved slowly, counting victories in steps. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked. Daniel considered. "Because staying seemed like the answer," she nodded. "Then staying is the skill we'll teach." An internal review tried to sour the miracle into suspicion. The way institutions protect themselves by doubting oxygen. Daniel sat under two bright lights, while questions poked old bruises. Maya, authorized by rank and sutures, watched until it mattered. His times match dispatch. My wound matches his pressure. Your cruiser's radio logs match his call. He stayed. We're not prosecuting decency. The room adjusted itself. Afterward, in the hallway, she rubbed her shoulder and said, "I hate when kindness has to pass inspection." Daniel shrugged. It passed. Rusty sneezed, unimpressed by paperwork, and collected 3 illicit ear rubs on the way out. The combination came small on purpose. A quiet room, coffee in paper cups, a few claps that were real. The chief's suit had the decency to be a little wrinkled. "For extraordinary aid," he read, then looked up and softened aid with his eyes. Rusty received an unofficial canine collar embossed with a tiny badge. He wore it with a serene entitlement of a creature who already understands rank. Daniel looked like a flight risk, then didn't run. When applause rose, he kept his gaze on Rusty's new hardware. It helped to applaud the dog instead of himself. With his first facilities check, Daniel fed Rusty like royalty, then walked to the hardware counter that cuts keys and sometimes futures. He turned the little wheel and stamped letters into a tag. "Rusty have found we belong to each other." The clerk read it, then stapled the receipt with unusual ceremony. That night, soup simmered in a donated pot on a hot plate that sputtered into reliability. Maya arrived with forms "Nobody survives alone," and a plan she swore was mortal-proof. They signed, sipped, and traded silences that didn't need apologies. Rusty arranged himself between them like a friendly galleon. Saturdays began to belong to the church basement where coffee is strong and hope is practical. Maya posted flyers. Free first aid, 911 basics. No ID needed. 10 came the first week, 22 the next. Daniel taught compressions on a mannequin with a steadiness people borrowed. "It's not heroics," he said. "It's staying, press, count, breathe, stay." Rusty patrolled the aisles, collecting courage in the currency of hands. A grandmother learned to wrap a wound gently. A teenager asked, "What if I'm scared they won't come?" Maya answered, "We come," and meant it. Paperwork later turned the room's hum into a program. One evening, Daniel returned to the corner where glass had glittered like cruel confetti. He touched the municipal tree that had washed everything and said, "We got here," as if reporting to an old friend. Rusty sat the way dogs sit when a moment asks for reverence. The city continued its indifferent kindness. Buses exhaling, neon lying, footsteps promising. The street light he once feared now just did its job, which felt like grace. Daniel scratched Rusty's neck and headed back toward a door that opened with a key instead of lock. The distance between outside and home had finally shrunk. The non-profit found him a single room with a west window and a heater that worked more than not. He lined the sill with screws and pencils, tools, and small faiths. The woman in the sea-green scarf printed a photo of Rusty looking conspiratorial and left it on the counter like a blessing. Maya came by with a stack of benefits papers, a roll of painter's tape, and the kind of patience bureaucracy can't outlast. They named the plant. It didn't die. Later, Daniel stood in the middle of the room and realized he hadn't planned an exit route. Facilities offered him months instead of weeks. Mornings across 2 floors, coverage that included tetanus shots, and someone had fought for this basic veterinary care. He read the letter twice, then signed careful, as if ink could startle the future. On the way home, he stopped at a bakery that sold yesterday's bread like kindness, bought 2 loaves, and asked about sometimes for friends. The baker said, "Sometimes is the start of always," and tied the bag with string. Rusty carried it half the way, proud of the weight. Small abundance felt heavier than hunger because it asked to be shared. At the academy, he said no twice before saying yes to 5 minutes with recruits who'd only seen the world from the driver's side of a cruiser. He didn't sermon. Some nights ask a question. He told them, "You can be the answer by staying long enough to matter." Sometimes that's pressure and patience. Sometimes it's a phone call. Don't underestimate quiet work. Rusty, guest of honor, inspected boots and hearts with equal rigor. Afterward, one recruit lingered and admitted he was afraid of freezing. "Count," Daniel said. "Doing something creates the next thing. Press, count, breathe, stay." There were setbacks as life reclaimed its ordinary teeth. A wrench slipped. Knuckles bled. A bus closed his doors cruelly. Rusty ate an entire bag of treats, and then forgave himself magnificently. There were victories equally small and more significant. An elevator stopped trapping wheelchairs. A clock returned to time. A neighbor knocked, not to complain, but to ask Daniel to sign for a package. The city didn't become a fairy tale. It became livable. On payday, Daniel taped the stub inside a drawer, not a trophy, just proof of re-entry stamped in numbers that held. Maya returned to full duty with a ceremony deliberately too modest for microphones. The chief pinned a ribbon that understood itself. She searched the small crowd until she found Daniel leaning against a wall where sound softened. Their nod held the entire arc. The rain, the staying, the paperwork, the Saturdays. After she asked if he'd co-ed the next clinic, he said he'd bring muffins if she brought cones for marking compressions. Rusty negotiated for extra petting breaks. The deal held. City programs rarely feel like friendship. This one did, because it was built from hands rather than headlines. Autumn gentled the river path into brass and blue. Daniel and Maya walked Rusty, where geese heckled everyone equally. The water-keeping council none of them could contradict. "Do you think about the exact second it turned?" she asked. Daniel watched Rusty nose a feather like a clue. "I think about staying," he said. That was the turn. She nodded as if he had defined a policy worth writing down. Lights stitched themselves across evening. Traffic hummed a steady key. They turned toward their separate doors, both unlocked now, carrying the kind of quiet that arrives only after storms admit defeat. The department's Saturday clinic kept growing in concentric human circles. Shelter residents, shopkeepers, a choir that came for coffee and stayed for compressions. Daniel added a side table sign. "Small repairs, no charge. Tell me the story, too." People brought lamps with broken switches and memories with frayed wires. He fixed what he could and listened to the rest. Rusty rotated through the room like a living metronome of comfort. Maya tracked data because grants crave numbers. Daniel tracked names because days crave anchoring. Both kinds of accounting mattered, and for once the city paid attention without demanding drama. On a rain-stitched night, Daniel opened the drawer in his small room and took out the torrent strip from the coat he sacrificed to stop the bleeding. He had written 2 words on a note and tucked it there. "We stayed." Sometimes fear tried to masquerade as prudence and invited him to keep a bag packed. The fabric argued back quietly. He set down a bowl for Rusty first, as always, poured coffee into a chip mug, and listened to the radiator knock itself into good behavior. The city breathed, so did he. Staying, he realized, had become Hall's other.